Well, there are a lot of high fives being handed out in locker rooms throughout the college basketball world, although fewer and fewer as the bracket gets smaller and smaller down to the Final Four. We're going to talk some basketball tonight and some memories. It's great to have you with us here on Church Pew Sports. Bill Hobson here. Normally, Pastor Paul Miller is with me. He is literally stuck in traffic in transit somewhere in the Baltimore area as he's been on the road for a couple weeks. I am so glad to have sitting in for Paul tonight. My friend Kurt David played at the high level of Division II college basketball. He's got a championship ring somewhere in his world, played a little bit overseas, and he has the distinct honor, probably, I would think, Kurt, at the top of the resume of being the tallest Church Pew Sports panelist and co-host on the entire roster. So it's good to see
Yeah,
you, my friend.
yeah, at 4 foot and 33 inches, right? So the
4:30.
audience figure that one out. It's 4 foot and 33 inches, or 2 meters 6 centimeters for the metric people out there.
Wow.
So
Nobody subscribes to this podcast thinking they're going to have to do math. And here you come along throwing a wrench into the works. So good to have you with us. And your basketball background will come in very handy, as tonight we are also joined by my friend Brandt Packer. If the last name sounds familiar, it should. His father, Billy Packer. Brandt and I first met, though, while he was working as a producer for Golf Channel in, of course, the golf space, which is where I spend a lot of my time. And 2 years ago, pretty close to now, Brandt, you were on this program for the first time. Your dad had just passed. And I remember us having just a powerful conversation about the legacy and what he meant to you. And here we are now back in the final stages of March Madness. And I know you just got back from Indianapolis and watching the Tennessee Volunteers with your daughter. And it's good to see you again. And I have to think the memories are coming out of a fire hose as you go back into a Sweet 16 Elite Eight setting.
Well, thank you a lot, Bill and Kurt. The first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about the church pew is that when I would go to Final Fours with my dad in Indianapolis, there's a Catholic church right behind where the old downtown arena was. And you talk about the place to be seen to take communion. I mean, it was between Patino. I mean, everybody you could imagine. Calipari would take communion, and every time, I'd be behind my father, and you would hear the priest say, "Body of Christ, Billy, who do you like tomorrow?" Amen. And then it would be everybody, Coach Calipari, "Body of Christ, who do you like tomorrow?" And it was just like, to me, I was like, if you're ever going to put a mass on television, that was the show, was Final Four Sunday in Indianapolis. So that was the first thought that came to mind. But yeah, I was fortunate to take my daughter. Jim Nance had reached out and said, "Hey, we got two." And I turned to Hayden and I said, "Let's go." And we decided to get on a plane and hop up and hang with Jim, even though he had his Houston red and we had our Tennessee orange on. So we had a great time and just got back this morning. So it was really cool to have a father-daughter weekend after so many times where I always had a father-son weekend with my dad. So it was very cool.
That CBS family is truly a family, aren't they? I mean, for
Yeah.
Jim to reach out to you all these years later, and I know you worked together also in the golf space a bit, but it's kind of cool to hear that invitation be extended. And he's not calling the games, but obviously he's got the gold ticket to go wherever he wants to.
Yeah.
Can you kind of speak to how that family rallies around your family at the time of your dad's passing and since then?
Yeah, Jim is pretty much a second brother. I mean, I met him in '85. My first Final Four I was able to go to, luckily, was 1986 in Dallas, and that was Jim's first one as the host. So my dad treated him like a son, and Jim actually talked to my dad the night before Dad ended up passing. He was doing the game actually in Kansas City for the San Diego event, doing the Chargers playoff game. So he was actually able to talk to Dad, and we knew, Dad wasn't doing very well. And I talked to Jim all the time. Again, it's not, I view Jim as almost like brother Jim, rather than a Nance. So we talk all the time. His mom and dad have passed. We were involved, when his dad died of Alzheimer's. That was obviously a tough time. And Jim always kind of viewed, Ken Venturi as my dad, as kind of like two of his father figures once his dad passed. So it was great to, I had not seen him in a while. So it was fun to kind of do that yesterday. And, he knows our family so well, and he knows Aaron, my wife, and Hayden, my daughter. And yeah, he's just the best. So he's always somebody that I've relied on from professionally and personally try to have as much advice from as I can.
Yeah. We'll talk a bit more about some of those classic old stories of way back when. I want to talk a little Final Four here at the outset, though, and my bracket, of course, is long since gone. In fact, my biggest mistake was probably following the type of advice given out by somebody like comedian John Christ.
These people be hooping, bro. Christians can play basketball. Look at this NCAA tournament bracket. Okay, first you got Liberty and Grand Canyon, the two non-denominationals. Then you got the Catholics, Gonzaga, Creighton, Marquette. They're all in the tournament. This is just our starting five. Coming off the bench, you got the Christian mid-majors, Lipscomb, Wofford, High Point. And dude, look at these number one seeds. I mean, these are evil programs. I might bet on that, actually. All parlay. And you got Baylor in there. Sure, they haven't acted very Christian the last couple of years, but they're back in there.
So, my bracket was gone early on, and as we get to this Final Four now, and we have the 4-1 seeds for the first time in a long time.
Wait.
Yeah, Kurt, how did your bracket hold up, and what was your strategic approach to making your picks?
Well, full disclosure and first time ever, my full disclosure, I didn't even enter this year, and here's why. All the years I've entered, it seemed like the people that knew least about basketball were the ones winning. And all my friends, I'd be like, wait a minute, how did they win? They don't know anything about basketball. I've had people that talked about they picked basically by mascot. If it was a dog mascot, those are how they advanced. Or if it was a cat type mascot, that's just how they advanced. And those are the people that were winning. And I'm like, why am I even doing this? So I literally did not get in a bracket this year, but I have been following very closely. And mental note, yeah, I probably would have not done as well.
Brandt, did your bracket just basically start with all SEC teams and then you throw in a few extras?
I'm the ultimate SEC homer. Not that anybody cares. For the first time in my life, I had all 8 right and all Final Four. I went chalk with Texas Tech beating St. John's. I was under the impression that I think with this NIL world and this, as it kind of came to fruition, that the Cinderellas would not do as much. Lost a bunch early on. I went with all 4 number ones. It was the first time since 2008. So I've got Duke over Florida, and I think they're the 2 best teams. But there's nothing that would shock me of these Final Four if certain team, if Houston or Auburn come out ahead and win by 10, I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, you're 4 really good teams.
And Brandt, I think that's the point you just brought up, the Cinderellas this year. In other words, that's part of the conversation right now. Is there ever going to be another Cinderella with the NIL, with the revenue share, with the things that are coming out now in college sports? Because that does change the playing field and it does change the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you have to define what a Cinderella is. I can't see as an Arkansas team as a Cinderella. I can't see as NC State, even though they were in a great story last year, a big-time program from the ACC being a Cinderella. I think the only chance you get is kind of what St. John's is going to have is if you don't have a football school, and if this House versus NCAA passes and you have the $21 million in your budget to play with, and you don't have to allocate 14 or 15 million to football, and you're able to allocate 14, 15 to basketball, can a Butler or somebody like that do that? I think that's the only chance a Cinderella has. But the days of having 4 fifth-year seniors that grew together and played together and are stronger than everybody. I mean, the odds of if you got a stud, a school like any school in the country will pluck them away by saying, "Here's $1 million after your freshman year." I just don't. I hope it does, but it makes a tournament great. I don't see how it can happen.
I don't either.
That's a good point.
And I wonder if this is the conversation that we wish sports fans were having, because it doesn't feel like it, right? What it feels like it should be is, man, these are some great teams. Can't believe the 4-1s made it. Let's talk about some of the seniors that have developed through that program through the years. And instead, none of them have. If you look at the players, most of the top players' resumes, you might see 3 schools on there. You might see more than 4.
Yeah.
And I think I want to give credit where it's due. I think Charles Barkley, on the Dan Patrick shows, really did a thorough job of summing up kind of where I am with all of this.
The NCAA, they are the most stupid, idiotic people in the world. Like, they've already ruined college sports with this NIL thing. And I'm not against players making money. It's just out of the wild, wild west right now. But to have the transfer portal in the middle of March Madness got to be one of the stupidest things that I've ever seen in my life. Just when you think they can't get any more stupid, they trump themselves and have the transfer portal in the middle of March Madness. It's just free agency every year.
It is. It's unfettered. These 18 and 19-year-olds have more freedom of movement than an NBA player or an NFL player, because there's contracts. And I can't quite wrap my head around the reality that during the tournament, for instance, Indiana University has a new head coach. As we sit here tonight on Monday, March 31st, the Indiana Hoosiers basketball team has 0 players on its roster. None.
Same with Maryland.
Okay, so what are we doing here? Brandt, what are we doing here? This is
Well, I'll say 2 things. I think the NCAA, if they could go back, they've been just so reactive for years versus proactive. They were just, they're student athletes. And I think if they would have gone back and I live in south of Atlanta, and you think of Cam Newton at Auburn, when those guys, Trevor Lawrence at Clemson, when they went into the bookstore and saw their jersey with the name on the back and didn't get a dime of that, if they would have gone back and said, hey, if we would have let them kind of get some of that, would it be where it is today? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if it would be quite as harsh, because those guys would have been able to get some of that revenue. And I think rightfully so. I mean, I know they're getting paid for books and boards, and I get that. And I do think that's been taken for granted a little bit too, which is a shame. I mean, medical, schools, clothing, they get all that. But conversely, you mentioned, the schools. I mean, you look at Kevin Willard leaving to go to Villanova from Maryland. They just got beat. When did that process start? So it's been true for the coaches to leave whenever they want to leave. Again, and being reactive, you go back for years when a coach would leave, the NCAA wouldn't let that player leave. The NCAA believed that the players signed up because they were going to school, had nothing to do with the coach. Again, that's being reactive rather than being proactive. So there's a lot of finger pointing, and I think I don't want to say it's a waste of time, but now you got to look forward. I don't know how you go backwards unless you make them employees, and then you start going through, and now you open up a whole another can of worms. I just don't see how you can go back. You got to go forward and say, how does this work? Because it's never going back to the way it was.
And is there any wisdom in
point?
Is there any wisdom in instituting the old idea where after your transfer, you've got to sit out a semester?
You would think. But again, I mean, like you look at college football, I mean, you can transfer after your spring semester, and then they have their early signing period in December, and those guys are transferring. I mean, there were players that went to the college football playoff that were demanding X, or they weren't going to play in that playoff. I mean, it's just crazy. And again, I think unless you make them employees, I don't know. I just don't see how you can do this. I mean, the unlimited transfer rule really doesn't make sense. But again, you also have to wonder, and it's over my pay grade, what will hold up in court? Because so far the NCAA is over, right? I mean, right. So you got to imagine if they're going to hold anybody back. I mean, now you see this transfer rule. If you go to a JUCO, you come back. They gave Pavia from Vanderbilt the right to play 5 years. University of Tennessee, with one of their stud baseball players that transferred, they didn't grant it. So now he might sue, and he's probably going to win that. So yeah. I don't know how you can go backwards. I think you've just got to figure out these are the rules. How do we make them? And I think you got to get the coaches involved. And it feels like the coaches are the last ones who find out what's going on. I mean, everyone's complaining about this about this portal. I mean, there's no way if you had coaches in a room in an NCAA meeting that they would not have played devil's advocate and said, wait, we can't have this portal open up while the tournament opens up. I mean, they would have squashed that in a heartbeat.
Kurt, it's interesting right now, because if you look at like last year, by the end of March Madness, half of the NCAA Division I players were in the portal. I mean, think about that for a second.
We're at 1,400 now.
I think we're going to break that this year. I mean, at this
Yeah.
pace, I think it's going to go over, in my opinion.
Yep.
And I like what the Ivy League is doing right now. To be honest, my daughter's being recruited by an Ivy League school, and that's the only reason why I know this. They are opting out of the House versus NCAA lawsuit, which means they're not going to do revenue share. They're not doing roster limits, and they still do NIL. But basically, what they're saying is we are still believing in student athletes. You're
Mhm.
here to be a student, and yeah, you play sports while you're here. We're going to take care of you. But it's interesting because they were one of the whole league declared, no, we're not going to buy
Right.
into this right now.
Right.
And so it's interesting because Brandt, you bring up a great point about the transfer portal because it really is, and Barkley put it best, it is the wild, wild west. I like Gino's approach, the women's coach that he talks
Yeah.
about, hey, coaches are under contract. Why don't we put players under contract then, like you
Yeah.
said, like an employee? And that way, hey, you want to break your contract? Okay, this is what needs to happen. This is what, financially needs to happen. This is what needs, as far as eligibility needs to happen. It's all the question I have right now about this whole fiasco, and I use that word strongly, is who's in charge?
Right.
Who's dictating the direction of this right now?
Well, I think the biggest irony is going to be the only time you can define who's in charge and what the actual strategy is when they break away from the NCAA and just create a X amount of, if you want to make it 36 to 64 power league, and then those guys will create their rules and say, here's what we're playing under. And then ironically, the NCAA will have no control over it. And then all the Cinderellas will be part of the NCAA basketball tournament because that's who's left over. And I think that's the only, the NCAA wanted so much power for so long that the only way this is going to work is to break away from it. And now they're left with, there was always years that 90% of their annual revenue was based on the men's NCAA basketball tournament. So now what's that going to look like? If the football teams break away, those other teams won't stay for basketball. So what's left for what you're giving Turner and CBS if there's a breakaway?
Okay, so I'm envisioning something here, Brandt, as a guy who's been deeply enmeshed in the CBS world and knowing what March Madness means to that network.
Sure.
If the Blue Bloods all disappear and run off to run their own tournament,
Yep.
and CBS still has this billions of dollars contract to carry the tournament.
Yep.
Now viewers are expected to watch, Loyola Marymount take on Central Michigan. CBS is going to be saying, well, no, we signed up for something a little different from this. So that blows up that contract.
Sure.
Because
Right.
they're going to follow the money.
Right.
At the same time, as we have this discussion about player movement and the ridiculousness that it is, and Kurt, you're right, it's a fiasco. If one of our other frequent co-hosts was on with us, his name is David Collins, he would right now be screaming into his camera and his microphone, then the coaches can't move either, right? So here we are. Indiana has a new coach, right?
Yep.
Indiana has a new coach, Darian DeVries. This is the welcoming press conference for Darian DeVries
Yeah.
last year as he came to West Virginia.
I said this a lot, and I know Ren mentioned it. I spent 20 years at Creighton University because that was the place that I loved. That was a place my family loved, and I wasn't going to leave, Creighton University for just any job at the time. And I wanted the right one when I got my first head coaching job. And to me, that was Drake University and a place that I wanted to be. I felt like there was a vision there. There was a plan there.
There was a plan there.
Yep.
And the plan there was to be there for as short amount of time as I possibly can, because we as fans seem to be less irritated by a coach chasing the bag
Yep.
than we are with players chasing the bag. The comments that you all just heard from Coach DeVries, I don't know him, maybe he's a fantastic guy, but the comments you just heard from him kept him at Drake for one season, and he took the Indiana job when, Brandt?
Yeah. Well, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, during the tournament.
Yeah.
During the tournament.
Yep.
And that he's not the only one where that's happened. So do we have to lay over top of this all either nobody can do this or everybody can do this and it's just unfettered chasing after whatever? shiny object is in front of you.
Well, I'll give you 2 points. One, again, I go back to what holds up legally. I mean, can you tell a coach he's not allowed because, the lawyer will go in and say, well,
Restriction of
person
trade.
X was at McDonald's and they got a great job to go to Ruth Chris. We can't hold that person back.
Yeah.
I think the second fascinating thing is, and it really happened, and I think a lot of people forget about it, when the Pac-12 was looking to expand and bring in Texas and Oklahoma years ago, obviously before they went to the SEC, there became the notion that these leagues will break away. And then there was going to be a cutoff of whatever that last team was. And when you went back and looked at those articles, it became Kansas State was more important and valuable than Kansas because it was a football product, right? Because there would be no basketball tournament involved. It was, hey, where are we breaking to football? And then we'll figure out, does basketball stay in what it is? Or does this league say, okay, now we'll go bid out to Netflix and Apple and Amazon a basketball tournament of these people? So what's fascinating to me is, one, what's the cutoff? For example, of Vanderbilt. What does Vanderbilt bring in the SEC if it's a football move only? Are they cut out? Then let's say that league that creates this power league is also going to create a basketball tournament. If you're Mark Few at Gonzaga, you have no football. You have no leverage. Are you trying then to get a job and say, hey, let me go to West Virginia. Let me go to that because they're going to be able to be involved in this tournament moving forward. So there's so many layers to this to me and it's happened in golf. I mean, I've got a lot of college golf coaches that are really good friends of mine that have to think about, they're at really good jobs. Do they want to move to a job that's not as powerful, but will be in a big time Power 4 league to make sure they're protected? I think college basketball coaches are going to have to think that way.
Wow. Well, I have a question for you too, that as we look at this, and we've all heard that saying, follow the money, right?
Yep.
Follow the money. Where is the money for all this that's causing this? And is it the media? Is it the supporters? Is it the NIL packages that these universities are creating? Where's the money for all this? What is causing this in your opinion?
It's a great question. I mean, imagine if this house settlement happens. I mean, I've talked to a lot of administrators. I mean, you're talking about a $21 million budget every year.
Right.
Not talking about, hey, this is over a 10-year period. We can pay an annuity or pay it over a period. This is every year. And then you will also have collectives that will go in and say, okay, I can maybe subsidize this million over here to this or to that. But at some point, that's going to run out. Because if you only have 12 in college football, and let's say you're Alabama and you don't make it again this year, right? Or let's just say, you start looking at big time schools that need that TV money that comes in. That's why I think, Kurt, to your point, if the basketball, if the super conference breaks away and everybody thinks football, I think it only makes sense to form with those teams basketball and then bid it out. So if it is ESPN and Fox who currently don't have a basketball tournament, there's free money just sitting there. Again, you're talking about Amazons and Apples and those for Netflix of the world that they pay with B's, not M's, right? So I mean, they're looking at billions, not millions. Now you start saying, as an athletic director, how do we say no to that? Because yes, are we following the money? But we need that money to make that $20 million budget every year. And if that means we can create our own basketball tournament and kill the NCAA tournament, which is terrible, and go to Amazon, how can you say no to that? Because you got to keep a job.
And at some point, the fans disconnect because it's just too much. It's not.
Bill, you're seeing it in golf, right? I mean,
Yes,
you and I are golf
sure
guys.
are.
You're seeing it in professional golf right now. The fans have said, we've had enough. Like, unless it's the majors, we're done. You've seen it in NASCAR. You've seen it in F1. You've seen it in tennis.
Yeah.
I mean, who can name a top 5 tennis player or anybody who's won an event outside of those? I think you're just seeing, sports fans go, well, we're going to put our money somewhere else.
Yeah. And as a Wolverine here, it's very rare for me to compliment the coach of the Spartans. But Tom Izzo has had some really good things to say. I shared one of his comments as the teaser coming into this episode. That was the voice you all heard at the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been very well spoken. His place in the game is very well established. And Kurt, I think about the guys who played when you played and how different life might be today if back then there was this permission slip to essentially do whatever you wanted to. And by the way, classes are optional. Nobody's talking about that part of it. So,
Yeah.
for instance, would you have been at Saginaw Valley State all the way through if you had had the opportunity and some financial incentives to go to even a MAC school or a Big Ten school? Would you have just
Oh,
go?
absolutely not. In fact, the only reason why I went D2 was so I could start right away and play right away on a team that was winning championships, right? That was the only reason. Otherwise, if there was money involved or more championships or more opportunity, in a heartbeat, I wouldn't even thought twice, to be honest. And
Yeah.
so that, there's not a loyalty. And I think we saw it in pro sports for a long time with the free agent markets, right? I mean, you don't see long-term players rarely that are with one franchise anymore. I mean,
Yep.
very rarely. And I think now it's trickled into college sports, that we're seeing it with college sports, like Brandt's point. I mean, if you see somebody jumping ship, I don't know if it was 3 times, 4 times, whatever it was, that you see some of these players. I mean, I don't know. To me, it's all about regulation and policy, right? How do they regulate it? What are the policies? How do you fix this, right? You can't go back. I agree, you cannot go back. But how do we continue to go forward?
Okay, but I'm sorry, Kurt, but there's a verse in scripture that says all things are lawful for me, but not all things are expedient or beneficial, right?
Yes.
And I keep wondering, I think it's in Ephesians. I keep wondering when we're going to see the elite athlete, the one who everybody is trying to throw money at. And maybe it's because of mom or dad's influence or grandma's influence who says, you're staying there. Are we going to see the kid who comes out and says, I don't want to go anywhere. I love it here. This is my place. I'm going to finish my degree here. And if I get to play as a professional, am I expecting, I guess my question to both of you is am I hallucinating and expecting a 60-year-old maturity out of a 19-year-old who has 7 figures dangled in front of him?
So I'll give an example. It's a guy Ziegler from Tennessee, right? So he's been there 5 years, unbelievable, broke every record known to man, stayed true as a Vol, but he's also 5'8" as a point guard, right? So if he's Cooper Flag, is that the same? I think if these guys are not going to get paid and it's for the love of the school, I mean, these agents are involved so early on.
Yeah.
I don't think they're getting advice where that's happening. And I hate to say this, I think the parents are involved too. I mean, you can say all you want, but I don't care if you're from money or not from money. You start getting thrown these numbers around. It's hard to say, oh yeah, we're not going to take this. And you guys are seeing it from the other side. Conversely, I mean, how many great college basketball coaches? Look at the ACC alone. How many great in the last 4 or 5 years basketball coaches have we lost that have said, we don't want to do this anymore? And then you brought up Izzo. This is a point, and I'm shocked nobody's written about this. If this House passes, right, and there's this $21 million budget, and like I said, 14's going to football or whatever, what's going to happen is the basketball coaches are going to, it's good like you're going to be at the DMV. They're going to be in line asking for, okay, we need $200,000 to pay player X. All right. So let's say you're Izzo, or let's say you're Hubert Davis, or let's say you're Mark Pope at a basketball school, right? Particularly Hubert Davis. So you're going to go ask for that 200 grand so you can pay for player X. Behind you is Bill Belichick, who's never been told no in his life. And you just brought him in. I'm serious. You just brought him in to, hey, shape football. And Belichick goes in and goes, well, we also need that $200,000 to pay for this defensive back. Now you're this arbitrator at the school, and Hubert Davis is going, wait a minute, we're North Carolina. We're Michael Jordan. We're James Worthy. We're Dean Smith. What do you mean we don't get that money? Well, we're going to have to give it to Belichick. And if that happens and football wins out over and over, how many more great coaches are going to say, the Rick Barnes of the world, the Kelvin Sampsons of the world, the Izzos of the world, Bill Selfs of the world, that just say, I don't want to go to the NBA. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done with this. And I'm afraid that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. And then you're going to have coaches like we just talked about earlier who were saying, I'll take it and run to wherever they can
Boom.
go.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Wow.
Yeah, I can sign a contract for 2 years and make, X amount of dollars and be done.
Yeah, and be done.
And then it's like a fraternity, right? They kind of recycle around. One of the things, because I've been very close to it, I want to see how this is going to play out with the Ivy League, because they are staying true to student athletes. They really are. And I'm interested to see if at all they'll have any influence of what happens long term. They
In terms of what? What do you mean by in terms of the
Well,
big picture of the NCAA or within?
Yeah, they're clearly opting out. They're clearly saying we're not going to do revenue share. We're
Yeah.
not going to do any of this house settlement, even roster limits. They're not doing that. And so I'm interested because they truly are staying pure to, hey, you're a student athlete.
Yeah.
Now, when's the last time an Ivy League has won the NCAA tournament?
Yeah. Or Petey Carrill, what Petey did at Print, like, does that exist anymore?
Right.
Will
That's
they
my
even
point.
have the players? Now, the other thing that could happen often, which you make a really good point, and you even heard Patino talk about, do you go and even recruit high school players anymore? Is it even worth recruiting these players? Because, there's a kid out now that's in that $3 million range that Tennessee was looking at. I mean, you don't have no idea. You might pay for him for a year. He might not even work. Do you just go to the portal? And if that's the case, is the trickle down that these high school players need somewhere to play? Is that where it could go to a lesser school, or the Ivy League takes those high school players and it becomes more of a high school league? Because other than Cooper Flagg, I mean, you're hearing more and more coaches say we don't want to even touch a high school player, which is crazy to think about.
And then
Yeah, no,
I see that.
I'm seeing it firsthand right now. In our daughter's a junior in high school, and she's being recruited. And one of the things we're seeing in the 2025, there's decommits now. Like Notre Dame had a local soccer player that we know that they're like, hey, we just don't have a roster spot anymore. We're gonna, we have roster limits. We got to cut back. And so it's a trickle down. I mean, the Power Four having to say, listen, we're at roster limits now. So those Power Four players or recruits are now going to become mid-majors.
Yep.
If mid-majors are going to become D2. And so it's really, and one of the things we haven't talked about yet on the podcast is that the NCAA is meeting this summer to talk about 5 for 5.
Right.
In other words, 5 years of eligibility in 5 years for eligibility now, which is going to really change the landscape.
Yep. No red shirt. That's right.
With all of that up in the air, all of this turbulence and controversy, and I really don't think, let me back up. At the beginning of the portal and the NIL, I think that I particularly ran the risk of sounding like the old man yelling at the clouds and get off my lawn. I now think that it's permeated through all of sports fandom. I think 25-year-old sports fans are yelling the same things.
Yeah.
Because you now don't get to follow the progression of an athlete from freshman year up to senior, where he's ingrained in the fabric of your team. He's been your quarterback since he was 18, and you can't wait to. That just isn't happening. And people miss that. You can only, as Seinfeld says, you can only root for your jersey color so much. You need to get invested into the people who are there. So, with all of that being said, Brandt, especially for you, has all of this in any way reduced any of your Final Four passion, given your background and your family lineage? Are you still, when you were at the games in Indianapolis, was the hair still up on the back of your arms and the blood pressure spiking?
Well, considering I'm a Tennessee Vol, we've never been to the Final Four. That's really a hard question to ask me. Yeah, but again, we were a weird team because we were so senior, between Meshack and Ziegler, who had stayed there forever. But again, that's incredibly rare, right? But then we also had Dalton Connect, who came in last year as a one-year player, blew the first team All-American, blew it away. Now he's beloved. So I think if you win, this is all trumped. You know what I mean? Like, it's Joe Burrow, it goes to LSU. Every LSU fan prior to that is thinking, oh, we hate this. Now Joe Burrow goes and they're incredible. Look at Ohio State. Those running backs, right? I mean, the guys who came from Ole Miss and everybody else, they're ready to fire their coach after they lost to you guys. And then they win it all with the transfer portal, so they love it. So to me, it goes back to, if you win, you're loving this thing. If you lose, you're trying to figure out how do we get it going. And that's always how it's been. But like I said, I just don't see how we're going backwards. And I think if you start getting on one of those fan bases that's a big time powerhouse that's spiraling down and down and down and can't get back, I think you're going to lose programs quicker than you did in the past. Oklahoma football, one of those kind. I mean, you start looking at like a power type school that just can't get going. I think you're just, you're going to see turnover on coaches. And now here's another $8 million, right? $10 million to a buyout. bring in another 8 million. There's 18 million with a staff and a coach, along with the 21 million that you're paying your roster. And that goes back to Kurt's point. At some point, the money is going to run out unless it infuses from somewhere. And that somewhere is expanding the college football playoff, selling off certain games, like I said, to Amazon or Fox or whatever. And you're going to have to chase the money. And it's this never-ending cycle that's you've got to feed these budgets somehow.
Yeah. Kurt, has any of this diminished your passion for it? Kurt?
No, I think the biggest thing is it's the lack of loyalty, right? I mean, I'll give you a great example, and I don't mean to swear in front of you, Bill, but I'm going to swear in front of you, Bill. People often ask, Kurt, who are you rooting for, Michigan or Michigan State, right? Who you want to win, right? And my patent answer, I always say when people ask me that, is whoever's winning. I don't care, whoever's winning. If it's Michigan winning, I'm rooting for them. If it's Michigan State winning, I'm rooting for them. And so I think and unless you went to school there, I think it's taken away the loyalty because, like you said, you don't have that developed athlete that's been there for 4 years or 5 years. Or, boy, look at his story. He overcame this injury his freshman year, and now he's world class. He's getting first round draft pick, and it's interesting. What year was it that Kentucky won? Brandt, you might remember this. What year was it that Kentucky won? Because I remember watching that game to kind of shift a little bit. Watching that game, thinking for Kentucky, draft pick 1 passes to draft pick 5. Oh, draft pick 5 passes to draft pick 7. Draft pick 3 passes to draft. I mean, literally, it was like they were like the first top 10 draft picks, it seemed like, for that team.
Yep.
And so that wasn't a portal, right? That wasn't, those guys primarily were guys that were brought to the system and brought up. Yeah. And so I think those days, like you said, we can't live in the past. I think those days are going to be difficult to find again. Coaches are going to find them. They're either declaring and going early to the NBA or some other league or G League or overseas.
Well, for the kid who isn't getting the minutes that he thought he was going to get, I think the reaction to that even just 10 years ago would have been, then get in the weight room and get better at what you do. And now the reaction is, I'm just going to go to this school. They told me I could play more. And I don't think that's good for the kid either. I mean, forget all fans and forget the programs and all the product presentation. It's not very good for the kids. It's not a very good lesson to teach somebody who's going to be done with sports inside of 6 years, one way or another. And
think about where the school he's going to transfer to. It's the highest bid. It's not the place where, hey, I grew up. I went to Houston and played golf my freshman year. Yeah. I thought it was the next greatest player. I thought it was going to be Nicholas Palmer Packer, and maybe not in that order. I was the 13th man on the Houston golf team, which is not that bad. We had 11 guys, right? I was done. But I transferred back closer to home. It had nothing to do with, who's going to pay me more. But that's where those guys are going to go. And I go back to, I was very fortunate to travel with my dad on a lot of games. I'll never forget, we were at North Carolina. They were playing Wake Forest. And Dean Smith pulled my dad aside and said, this kid, Tim Duncan, this freshman, I'm telling you, in 3 years, he's a number 1 overall pick. And, my dad's nodding. And I was just kind of like, wow. We grew up in Winston-Salem, so we knew the Wake roster and who Coach Odom had. And I remember getting in the car that day, and my dad goes, boy, poor Dean has lost it. He goes, I just cannot believe that he thinks that this kid from the Virgin Islands can be a number 1 draft pick. I mean, the kid's 110 pounds, 6'8". Are you kidding me? Yeah. And then, every time Duncan did what he did, between what he did at Wake and became obviously an all-time top 50 NBA Hall of Famer, my dad always goes, Dean might have known what was going on, but that Tim Duncan kid doesn't exist anymore, right? Like he's probably not even picked somewhere because he's 130 pounds and can't develop his game, and from the Virgin Islands, which nobody knows from. So that Tim Duncan might not even that player. Who knows what he does? Because there's only so much you can work on by yourself. You got to get that break, and he's going to quit and become a great swimmer.
Well, it's interesting because the term I'm using right now is under-recruited. We're going to see more and more kids under-recruited as a result. Yep. High school players, even college players that are going to be under-recruited or recruited over. They're going to get recruited over from the transfer portal. And so it's in the coach. I feel for the coaches because the college coaches, I know they're feeling more and more pressure for development. In other words, they got to get out and make more money and get money. And, that's part of it. I know coaches that have gotten out for that alone. They're like, hey, this isn't what I signed up for.
Does this open up doors then, Kurt, at the Division II level for coaches to get into high school gyms and realize that there's some good, really good talent in those gyms that aren't being recruited by the Big Ten or by the SEC because they already have their paychecks all accounted for, their payrolls all doled out. So does this open the door for programs that can uh, kind of bring them in the door? Now, the hard part is then that coach put his life into these kids and they're maybe gone in a year or two. But is that trickle down effect? Is that the D2 level?
Yeah, I think the reality right now is helping high school parents and kids realize it's not D1 or bust, right? I think that's been kind of the mentality is, hey, I'm playing D1 or bust.
Yeah.
I think with the roster limits, I think with all the transfer portal action that's happening, I think that players need to take a look at, what are the best options for me right now? What's the best fit? Maybe it's not D1. Maybe it's a mid-major. Maybe it's a good D2. Maybe it's an NAI or even a D3, depending on what what I do, Bill. Brandt doesn't know what I do now as far as with former professional athletes. But as I tell people, 100% of professional athletes ultimately lose their job, right? It's undeniable fact. At some point, regardless of what level you play, you will be done. And whether it be a high school player, a college player, or a pro player. And so to me, it's more, what are the lessons of life that I'm learning from playing this sport? That's the real gold, because that paycheck's going to go away. The sound of the winning championship, applause is going to go away. What are the lessons that I've learned, and how do I apply those to remain relevant? Right, that's the biggest key, regardless what level you play, in my opinion.
But unfortunately, though, Kurt, everything you said is great, but then there's a comma, and then today's athlete goes, okay, if that means it's going to run out, then I got to make as much as I can before it
100%.
runs out. And that's the biggest difference right now.
Yeah, you're right.
Of the three of us on this podcast, we're all in television, we're all in media in some way, shape, or form. Kurt's won an Emmy for his show From Glory Days. Brandt's been at it forever, and he is used to, in live production settings, having voices in his head more than normal, right? It's just all sorts of voices going through.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes, exactly. I am going to take advantage for a moment of Brandt's presence to ask for him to begin this communication chain. I can go from Brandt Packer, maybe through him to like Jim Nance, and then maybe from Nance to people who have some decision-making ability in the world of college basketball.
Uh-oh. This is not good. I'm nervous now.
This would be good. This is key.
This is not good.
On the prior episode of this podcast, I made a vow to Paul Miller and David Collins that for the entirety of the tournament, I would no longer text them about my absolute hatred for the review process.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay, so, and here's my semi-solution. First of all, it would be that referees just get some spine and just stand by their calls and not.
I've got one for you too. I mean, I can't wait to hear yours.
So here's my at least initial suggestion for minimizing the stoppages and impact of the reviews. When the review is called for and the officials go to watch TV for a while, both teams need to go to the opposite ends of the court from their bench so that it's not also a free timeout. I'm so sick of these becoming strategy moments where the fingernails are being examined on who touched the ball last. And then you just get together. They get to get out the chalkboard or the grease board and draw up the next play. And they had no timeouts left. So I'm thinking neutral corners like in a boxing match. So it's not going to stop the number of reviews, but it would at least make them less impactful strategically. So Brandt, if you could please just start that up the ladder.
Mine has been, I've said it for years, every replay should be in real speed because they don't call it in slow-mo. It should be in real speed and you get 3 chances to look at it. And if you can't, after the 3 chances of pressing play and stop, decipher is it the right call or wrong call, then the call stands. Off we go. But we shouldn't be able to go back and look at it in super slow-mo. It should be, hey, that's how they called it. Everyone's in real speed. If you can't tell and it's this, it's what you call it. So there has to be some part of calling it on the floor, right or wrong, that has to stand. Because you can't, these guys are just making a call knowing it doesn't matter. I'm going to go over here for 5 minutes. There's no flow in the game. The other thing you're seeing too, these 2-hour TV windows can't be met. So now it's disrupted the entire thing. You've got stupid. My big deal is the 10 o'clock tip time to even start with.
Crazy.
That 9:40 tip time has no chance of tipping before 10:05. That's without even a timeout or an overtime. So these 2-hour windows can't fit because the games are just turning into way too long. Make it real speed. You're out of there. You cut all this stuff by 10, 15 minutes easy in every sport.
I have a prediction for it as well. I think technology is going to take over. The advancement of technology. I think it's going to be somebody in New York watching from the studio, from all the camera angles. I mean, you think about it, we have autonomous cars now driving. I was down in Phoenix not too long ago, and I'm watching these cars drive by me that have no drivers, right? All the cameras and everything going on. With all the cameras, with all the angles, with everything, that it's going to be somebody in a studio somewhere.
I agree.
Quickly reviewing, like boom, done.
It should.
And there may not be any referees during a game. I don't know how they work that out, but I'd say in 5 years, 10 years, it might be all autonomous officiating. That's my prediction.
We spent quite a bit of time talking about all the revenue in these games, so I know better than to wish that there were fewer commercial breaks. If anything, they will find a way to have more of them. But it's so hard to watch the last 34 seconds of a game take 12 minutes.
There's no flow. It's not the way the game was invented.
Then you're shocked that a kid comes in and misses an open three, and I'm like, he hasn't touched a ball in 8 minutes.
Yeah. Or the front end of a 1-and-1. Look at Texas Tech the other day. I mean, Texas Tech, Florida, if those aren't 3.5-minute commercials, does that happen? I mean, you're a long time. I'm shocked that I don't even know if this is legal during those long timeouts. If a kid can't just go shoot and stay warm.
That'd be interesting. A field goal kicker has the net on the sidelines, right?
Absolutely. Even if they say you can't go on the court and warm up, you have a basket next to your bench. I'm dead serious. I am shocked that you see quarterbacks throw it during timeouts. I'm shocked that kids just still sit on the bench and ice them. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's a great point. Right. Hey, take that one up to Jim Nantz, up to CBS, up to.
No, I've talked about it. Well, first of all, the fact they call it, my dad and I would argue, the fact that they call it a free throw is the dumbest thing. It's a free shot. No one's ever thrown it. Well, maybe Ben Simmons maybe has thrown it. But there's a couple, but it's a free shot. It's not a free throw. That's my other one that drives me bonkers.
Brandt, before we kind of wrap up our tournament talk, I'd love to have you kind of take us back into maybe as a young boy, your first like vivid memory of walking with Dad into a Final Four big time setting. I don't know that I can't remember venues. I don't think they always were played in gigantic stadiums.
No, I think 88 was the last one. I think because my mom had a brain tumor and we kept it very hush hush. And so Kemper Arena, I want to say in 88 was the last one. Then 89, it went to Seattle. And that became the beginning of the domes, if my recollection in that time frame.
Yeah, terrible setting for the kids to shoot in, but certainly gives a bigger crowd.
I can be honest, Lucas Oil was terrible. I mean, Indianapolis is unbelievable. It was, my father, it probably his favorite Final Four city, but the way they had Lucas Oil set up, I mean, we were 14 rows up, and it went straight out, right? I mean, it was just we're in that third of that football stadium. Yeah. I can't imagine trying to shoot in it. So that wasn't again, the city's great. But no, my recollection is just, he and Vital are so, they were so polar opposites. Like Dick would just sit in the lobby and my dad was adamant, hey, I'm here to do a job. We're going around. And believe it or not, my mom and I did not like going to Final Fours because he was so busy and we took away from him, which we obviously never wanted to do. But no, it was, 1980, let's see, what was my first one? I think 86 in Dallas was the first one I went to. I was 12. And first time I really met Nance and kind of hung around Nance. But just getting to meet some of the players and get to know the players, and get to know the coaches. I know the last time it was in Atlanta, 07, my dad just held Coach Wooden in such high esteem. And I remember, I think it was the last one Coach Wooden ever attended. And we got done with the Saturday games and I was walking across the court with my dad and he saw Coach Wooden and my dad never got in awe. And he still held Coach Wooden in such high prestige that we sat there for about 20, 25 minutes and just talked to him, and catching up with him. But my big thing was that being able to, as lucky as I was on Monday night, being able to, when they would play One Shining Moment on the court, and my dad would sit there and he would cry because he would stare at the coaches. And he
Really?
knew everything that the coaches put into it, and they're always with their wives and the family. And I always thought that was pretty cool because it was never about him. It was never about anything. It was about the coach, the wife, and the time they put into it as they all sat there and looked up. And I always thought, to me, that was pretty special.
Your dad had this unique ability to look into the moment of a competition and see the people behind it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's something I would have to think that you've latched onto and continue in your life to this day.
It's interesting, and I'll make it quick. I've only told the story a couple times, but his last year was '08, and he hated where the game was going. So he had 1-year contracts with CBS. So none of us knew that '08 was his last year. It was Nance, it was Sean McManus, it was my mom, and it was Bob Dekas, the producer. And Dad was adamant, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I want this to be my last Final Four and last tournament. And they said, okay, what we need to do, press. He goes, no press. If there's press, I'm walking away. I don't want anything to be about me. Once the tournament's done, if you want to leak it, that's fine. So regular season, no big deal, no big deal. Now the tournament starts. Now Jim is really pressing my dad. Billy, we have got to get this out. You've done 34 of these. And my dad goes, Jim, I'm telling you, if one thing is said, I'm leaving. I'm not doing it. So that night, it's Memphis and Kansas. And Nance, I just got home from a tournament, and Nance called me, and it was about an hour before tip, and said, hey, what do you think? And I'm looking at my wife, and I'm thinking, he's asking me, what, Jim, have you done any prep? And it was just this weird thing. And he said, hey, I wanted to call and just tell you I was thinking about you. And I just thought, man, that's a really weird thing. So they come on camera, and Jim says, Billy, for one final time, walk me through your pick, walk me through your keys.
Oh, dear.
And my heart sank. And I turned to my wife and I said, I think he's done. And she said, well, when he would have told you. I said, I think he's done. And we watched the game. Mario Chalmers hits the shot, goes into overtime. And Jim is so excited that it goes into overtime because he knew he had 5 more minutes with Dad. And I called home to Mom and I said, is he done? And Mom said, yeah, he didn't want anybody to know because he didn't want it leaked. Because if 1 ounce of any attention went to him instead of the players, he was done. Mm-hmm. And I was really mad at him. And I thought, you deserve it for 34 years. And I kind of let him know that. And he said, let me explain something to you. It's not about me. It's about them. And whenever you think it's about you, you have a problem. And I was like, man, could you imagine doing something at the top for 34 years and not wanting anything to be said? And they all thought it was because of the UNC Kansas game when Dad said it was over. And he said it was over because he felt like they weren't, Carolina wasn't competing. It had nothing to do with executives were mad. It was all decided prior to that. And I told him, are you going to fight that in the press? Dad goes, I don't care. I know the truth. They don't. Why do I need to fight this? He goes, Brandt, you're wasting your time. And so that I always thought that was pretty cool that, and I always say to myself, could I do that? Could I have done something at the top and not wanted anything to be said about me? I don't know if I could, but he was adamant. It's not about me. It's because of that one shining moment of looking at that coach and that wife who are crying and those kids crying. He said, if you take any second away of Billy, what a great run it's been, you take away from them, which is pretty incredible.
That's so cool.
Well, that says a lot about your dad's character, right? I mean,
thanks.
It says tremendous amount of his character, right? He wasn't. He's right. It's not about him, and I don't mean that in a subversive way. I mean, he understood his role, and he understood it to the extent. Even though he was a pro, he was a true pro. I mean, he was the best of the best.
Thanks.
And so it says a lot about his character. First time I met your dad.
Uh-oh.
And the only time I met your dad.
Uh-oh.
So. Backstory, we were playing down in Kentucky. We were staying at the hotel that's adjacent to Rupp Arena.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same weekend that NC State was playing Kentucky. And I can't remember, it was in the early 80s. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but NC State was top of the dog at that time. They were playing very well. I think it was Lorenzo and all those guys that did very well. And your dad's broadcasting the game. So we're in the hotel, at the same hotel. And the funny part is, I went to Saginaw Valley State. We're red and white, and we have an S on our varsity jacket.
All right.
So we're walking through the lobby. We're on the elevator. Everybody's like, "Oh, NC State! You guys play for NC State?" And we're like, "No, we're Saginaw Valley." But we get on the elevator, and your dad was there. And I remember having a very brief conversation with him, and you just described it best. he wasn't caught up about who he was or what he
No.
was doing. He was just having conversation. We had kind of fun with him actually in that short ride in the elevator.
That's
But I
cool.
remember it was so impressionable for me as a young man and an athlete and being in that environment and him just kind of being like your neighbor,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah. Well, Bill, it's funny. Yeah, I know you're a Michigan guy. His first Final Four in national championship in '75 when he did Michigan, Indiana. And there was, I think the story is, and he and Knight became really, really close at the end of the long run. But they had their barbs, as Knight did with everybody else. But I think it was 6 minutes to go before the tip. And Dad and Kurt Gowdy are rehearsing. And the Indiana manager taps my dad on the shoulder and says, Coach Knight would like to have a talk with you. And so my dad thinks, oh, wow, this is, Coach Knight's probably looking for a couple keys to beat Michigan. So my dad said he parades across like Stephen A. Smith does at every game, right? He parades right across half court, right over to Knight. And Knight's got the plaid jacket and he's hunched over with his team, May and all the guys right there. And Dad goes, oh, Coach, what do you need? And without turning around, and I can't repeat the language he used, but he said, Billy, where in the hell is the ACC tonight? And that was it. And my dad just stood there with a blank stare and went, all right. And he turned around and had to walk of shame all the way across back of half court. And Gowdy goes, what did Knight say? He goes, oh, he just wanted us to have a good telecast. So that's what he said. Hey, if you ever think like you're up above, you're really not as important as you think you are. So that put the poor guy, his first Final Four national championship game in perspective.
Well,
That's funny.
normally on this podcast, we have a couple of other segments like Holy Discontent, where you get to vent about things that are irritating you. We've kind of done that already.
I think we did that. Yeah, the first
And we have
20 minutes.
We have a segment called That Guy, where we sing out the praises of somebody who's doing it really well. But I think we're going to include that and roll that into our conclusion, which we do every episode, called the 3-minute message. And I'm going to set the scene here for you in just a moment before we get into it.
Homer, I'd like you to remember Matthew 7:26, the foolish man who built his house on sand.
And you remember Matthew 21:17.
And he left them and went out of the city into Bethany, and he lodged there.
Yeah. Think about it.
Think about it. Exactly. Well, we've had a lot to think about this evening, and between the insight from Kurt and the experience and the stories from Brandt about his dad, I was, and knowing that we were going to talk a bit about that legacy, Brandt, I was looking through just some of the lesser known sports moments that have transpired during the tournament. And one of them that I think slipped under the radar pretty much everywhere is one of the coolest press conference scenes that you will ever experience. This is the head coach of Mount St. Mary's. Yeah, go ahead, name me a player on that roster. Mount St. Mary's, the head coach, Donnie Lind, they had just lost. And he had
lost Duke.
Yes, they lost to Duke. They were the 16-1 and
Yeah.
they got in and they got out, right?
Yeah.
Here he is post-game with his son next to him. His son is probably 4 or 5. I'm not really sure. They have a tradition when they're playing at home, their son's on the bench. At the tournament, obviously, he wasn't at the bench, but he was right there cheering. And I want you to hear this father and this son talk about what matters most.
I got the best job in the world. I've said it, for the last 10 months. And, to share it with the people I love the most, which are my family. And shoot, those guys in that locker room has been unbelievable. And, hopefully he'll talk to the fact that he's had a blast over the course of the last couple of weeks. You should see him at home games when he's allowed to be on the bench. He's having a lot of fun. And that's what our program's about. We try to have as much fun as we can. And this is a fun game. And it's a blast to get to do this with him. You're up, bud.
These have been the best few weeks of my life, and I hope we have many, many more of them.
Come on.
Best.
I saw the visual. I saw the visual of that, Bill, and I couldn't believe it. I saw the video of that. I'm like,
get the
this is
Kleenex
amazing.
out. Proverbs 1:8-10 says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck." And the writer of Proverbs is putting this parent-child relationship into tangible terms because it's so hard to otherwise describe. And my encouragement would be, as we've heard about the legacy from Billy to Brandt, and we've heard about relationships and how these things that surpass the brackets, they surpass the frustrations with the system, and they are the things that can last forever. My encouragement would be for all of you who have, you don't have perfect families. Believe it or not, I don't know of anybody who does. But if we take some time and more carefully value those relationships and work through the differences, maybe utter the words, yeah, I'm sorry, I messed that one up, as opposed to letting bitterness and rage and division creep in amongst families. And so you're not talking to each other, even at funerals, kind of a thing. What a powerful example it would be to everybody around us as we spend a lot of time complaining about our nation, our culture, our whatever, if we began at home with making sure that we had things in order within our own home in a way that honored the Lord. And as we talk about takeaways from tonight's conversation, I think the theme of those family moments, that legacy that, Brandt, you shared that story with us at the end, really, really powerful stuff. So I can't thank you enough for coming on. Brandt and I are going to connect again in a few days and just talk nothing but golf, which would be super fun. But this was really, really cool. And Kurt, thanks for pinch hitting at the last minute as well. You did a great job.
No, my pleasure. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be and meet you too as well, Brandt. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, Kurt. And Bill, if I could, I normally, when the Vols season ends in any sport, I normally can't sleep for 2 days. And it's really powerful that you said that because when we lost by 19 yesterday, I had tears in my eyes thinking of my dad. And I hugged my daughter and I said, I am so happy you're with me right now. I had the best day you could possibly have. And again, I went from not sleeping, ready to throw away every Tennessee thing I had, just sat there and put it in perspective and said, heck of a year, but I got to spend it with her. And I knew he was up above looking down going, that's what it's all about right there. So it's really, really pretty amazing that you just said that.
Well, these things don't happen by accident, right? No. So fellas, it's been great connecting with you. Thank you all for listening. By the way, you can check out the video version of this podcast if you want to see three faces made for radio. And we're glad that you joined with us as well. Check us out at churchpewsports.com, and we'll talk to you again next time.